the 1970s, companies have had to report their quarterly earnings. This tells us exactly what is going on with the companies, how much money they have made, and what they expect to make in the future. But the president says, no, we don't need these anymore. We should move to a 6-month schedule. And he actually might be onto something, but there are some risks here as well. So why would we start to make this change now? What are the pros? What are the cons? And why do we even move to this standard to begin with? Let's go ahead and break it down. This is an interesting development that could be approved sometime in the near future. But first, why did we move here? So again, this is something that is under the control of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. They make all the rules around this. And they changed it in the 1970s because after World War II, the post-war era, a lot of companies were still expanding. You had a lot of soldiers coming home, taking a lot of jobs, and doing a lot of stuff. However, after that, when things started to slow down as we moved into the 1970s and 80s and we started to hit a recession, you didn't know what companies were still doing well and what companies were not. So they said, all right, look, everybody now needs to report every single quarter. And this gives us, the investors, every 3 months, we get to look at your reports and say, all right, look, I'm going to continue to invest here. Companies say, hey, we're going to start cutting staff. We're going to release this new product. We expect X, Y, and Z. And as we know, when earnings season hits, some companies do quite well. I get up here and say, hey, this is what we should expect, so on and so forth. This can be good or bad. Now, the interesting thing here is Europe doesn't do it this way. Europe does it every 6 months. And there are some pros and cons. So start off with the cons and let's go into the pros. The con is this. You introduce a bit more blindness and ambiguity into this process because remember, we need good information to make great investments. I mean, that should be quite basic, okay? Now, yes, with my portfolio, I make changes every 6 months. So I've said it before, I've said it dozens and dozens of times. I say it every single year. However, I use the information I get almost every day to make that decision on that day. So for example, the next time I'm going to look into my portfolio and make changes is in December. However, every single day, every single report that I'm reading and reporting on and doing videos about, I'm collecting all of this information in my head, in my notes and all this kind of stuff. And then I'm using all that information to make a decision and do something in December. But if I only get one report and not 3 before that, I may have a lot less information. Now, I don't know if that report is going to be the exact same size as it would have been if it was quarterly, or if they're just going to skip over a lot of stuff. I don't know. And that could be a bit of an issue. You don't have as many touch points to say, all right, this is what happened in Q1. Okay, things are fine. This is what happened in Q2. All right, things are getting worse. You just say, all right, here's what happened the first half of the year. And is it better or worse than the first half of last year, as opposed to having, more touch points, more information, and seeing are things getting worse throughout the entire year, or boom, you just kind of skipping over things. For example, in 2025, you had the January period before we had tariffs, then you had tariffs. Well, knowing before and after can give you a different result versus, hey, this is what we have. You just kind of skip over what is really going on. Those are 2 different time periods if you really think about it, depending on what your business is. And I can understand why you might want a quarterly report and a breakout of what happened in 2025 versus, hey, we're just going to skip over everything and just give you the halftime report after tariffs have already been implemented, because that can give me 2 separate answers. You can be great in the first quarter of the year before things got crazy and look completely different in Q2, and in Q3 right now when the market is up and everything's fine, look completely different. So it really depends, right, on how you want to look at it. Now, moving to the positive side of things is this. When you move from quarterly to biannual, or just 2 reports per year, I have argued this. Jamie Dimon has argued this. Warren Buffett has argued this as well. And they argued this back in 2018, that when you have these short-term reports, they introduce more short-term thinking that's not necessarily great for the health of the company and the health of the employees either. Now, I've seen this as someone who has worked in corporate America, and just as an investor too. There are a lot of companies who and CEOs who do this, and you can go all the way back to Jack Welch era. I don't know if I want to go into a huge history lesson here, unless y'all want to nerd out about it, but in either case, Jack Welch was the CEO of GE. He is the one who introduced what we call shareholder capitalism, in that you want to do everything for the benefit of the shareholders. That's where that comes from. He is the one who pioneered the whole, shareholder capitalism term, in a sense, in that you want to do all you can to raise the stock price. That is what started share buybacks. That is what started companies to buy up other companies and just get as big as you can and then cut off whatever resources or sell off whatever companies didn't work, whether it made sense or not. And that introduces us to things like Sherwin-Williams, for example. Sherwin-Williams just recently decided to cut its 401k match program. So if you worked at Sherwin-Williams, you used to get a 401k match. They temporarily suspended that, but they still pay a more than $700 million dividend and share buyback program. So they had $700 million in cash. Instead of taking care of the employees who work there and give them the 401k match, people who work there and help you to make the money, they decided to give that money out to shareholders and then buy back shares of their own company. The reason why you want to do a share buyback is to boost the price of the stock. The reason as to why you want to do that is because the stock looks better for the next quarter and the CEO gets paid based on that bonus. That whole process, that whole thinking goes back to Jack Welch, and you get paid based on those quarterly results. Now, will changing all of this eliminate all of that thinking? Probably not. But I do think it is a step in the right direction, because at the end of the day, you do want to, the company is based on the people. You want to make sure the people are taken care of and they want to work there and create good products. And if you got the money, right, you want to take care and say, hey, look, we want y'all to stay here, create good stuff, and then we can boost earnings and all that kind of stuff, right? And everybody wins. The people who work there, and then the investors and everything else, which is how things used to be if you start to look at history pre-Jack Welch. There's a whole book on Jack Welch's legacy and how things were before and after Jack Welch. I would recommend you take a look at that book because it is quite interesting on how that changed the entire stock market and everything in between. But in totality, I do think this is a good thing. It does have risk. I don't want to say that there are no risk here and that everything is going to be a 100% upside, but I do think we are a little too focused on every 3 months things have to be better. Every 3 months, the stock has to grow, and all we are doing is just focusing on what is next. The last job that I had, we went from a small, wouldn't call it a startup, but a mid-sized tech company. We were privately owned, and things were fine. We got bought by a public company, and the culture changed because we were a small, mid-sized, I wouldn't call us a startup per se, but we were making money. And then we got bought by a publicly owned company, and the culture changed. It was, y'all have to write down your hours and do all this stuff, and you got to make sure you get it in immediately because we got to make sure we turn all this stuff into finance because they have to report all this stuff because now they have to turn this stuff in for earnings and the investors. It was always, you got to do X, Y, and Z on time for investors because now we have to report earnings. And it was always like this constant press of get this stuff in so it gets to finance, it gets to X, Y, and Z, and we look good for the earnings report because our division didn't want to be, the new acquisition that wasn't making money. Turns out they laid off a lot of us, me included. So, it ended up not working at the end of the day. But that is a part of it, right? That is a part of we need to just look good every single quarter as opposed to, is this actually working or is this more of a long-term thing? There are dozens of companies that have run a loss for sometimes decades, like Amazon, before they became the behemoth that they are today. Uber is another example where they were unprofitable for a very long time. I don't know if they've been profitable yet, right? Or at least on an annual basis. So sometimes it makes sense to say, look, let's just take a longer term view. You don't have to be hyper focused on meeting expectations every 3 months. Let's take a step back and look at every 6 months and still give good information for investors. So I think it's a solid move. It's a solid move, and I think it makes a bit more sense. If you want to know more about what is going on in the stock market and everything in between, you want to check out these videos here.